Universal people. This is Jackie Sawicki and John Munitz with another John and Jackie's People's Podcast. This is a very special episode. We invited our moms to talk about parenthood. So please welcome my mom, Monica Vickery.
Hello.
And John, you want to introduce your mom?
Sure. Yeah, I got my mom here. We got Deb here. You know, this is going to be a very special episode because I'm going to be frank. My inspiration of getting into politics was from my mom herself, a local political advocate. But, you know, I wanted to really bring the parents together because, you know, neither Jackie nor I are a parent ourselves. And so I think when we're talking about parenthood, we should be talking to parents, and who better than having a little bit of perspective from our own parents. And so, you know, before we get into just a little bit of the actual childcare topics, I wanted to just give you a little chance to just introduce yourself. Mom, do you want to tell anyone on the People's Basics anything about yourself? A little bit about yourself?
Well, I grew up in Manhattan, in New York City, and I grew up in a single parent household. My mom and my father divorced when I was 4. And so my mother was a working single mother who definitely relied on a vast number of choices when it came to childcare.
Great. And so, Jackie, do you want to have anything you wanted to talk about for Monica? Or Monica, do you want to introduce yourself to the People's Basics audience?
Yes. My name is Monica Vickery, and I was born in Chicago, Illinois, but I was raised in Texas. I have 9 brothers and sisters, and my mother was a single parent from the time my baby sister was 2 weeks old, and she would be 68 right now.
And you've had a couple kids yourself.
Oh, I have 3 daughters of my own, 2 of my stepdaughters, and then a couple of adopted kids.
Mom likes to pick up strays, is what I say.
Well, I had 3 children of my own, and when I grew up with in a household with my sister, who was of both of my parents, and later my father did remarry, and I did have exposure to some half sister growing up as well.
Yeah, we got a big side of the family on one side, and then it's a little bit smaller on my father's side. But, you know, I think the first question that I wanted to ask both of you, and I'll start with my own mom, I'd love to ask you, you know, what was the biggest thing that you were just kind of, before you became a parent, you were kind of uncertain about going in? Like, you know, a lot of parents have a lot of anxiety potentially before the child comes. There's a lot of questions. You know, what was that thing that you were most kind of trying to get your bearings around and weren't sure what to expect going into parenthood in general?
I don't know. I didn't feel particularly. I don't know. I didn't feel unprepared. I was a project manager, and I kind of project managed it, and knew I wanted to have a child in July. I had a child in July. I mean, I kind of had a life plan, and you know, I got married and spent a year getting, you know, a house, and then I was pregnant. And I mean, I was kind of following a little bit of a life plan. It was kind of working out for me. And I think that for me, I didn't have a lot of trepidation or worry, but I was really, I guess, shocked at how all-consuming parenthood was, because I sort of did have a fantasy that one could work through it. So I was a little shocked at how difficult it was to work with a newborn infant. So I would say that was my biggest initial shock, was just how completely interruptive having kids is.
Yeah.
It was very
You get
scary.
you get all those idyllic feelings from like the movies. You know, you get the baby in the manger all calm, but they are very needy things. But Monica, I'd love to ask the same question to yourself. What did you kind of have as those concerns going in and were just not sure about before you became a parent?
I was really excited when I found out that I was going to be a parent. I was 24, and I thought I was ready. And it was pretty profound to me, because when she was born and the doctor or the nurse put her in my arms, it was like, oh my God, what am I doing? I have no book to go by. I had a lot of brothers and sisters, but when they were having their children, I was very young because I was next to the youngest. So my older brothers and sisters were already married and gone. So I was never really around them to know what was really happening. And then when I had my first child, it's like, oh, I think I made a mistake here. But it turned out to be pretty fantastic. It was scary at times, but
Yeah,
you
I think
just work through it.
perhaps forget that, when I grew up with, my half sister was 9 years younger than me.
Mm.
So I had a lot of experience with doing diapers and doing all of those things. And I made a lot of money in middle school and high school babysitting. So I think, at least a lot of people of my generation had a lot of experience with some of the day-to-day aspects of dealing with kids. But that all-consuming aspect is not, when you're babysitting, you do it for a couple hours and then you stop.
You send them home. I mean, then you go home. That's like being a grandparent right now. It's so much fun
Yeah.
because you can spoil them and then you can give them back. You couldn't do that as a parent. You didn't have anybody to give them to.
Yeah, the one thing I'd be curious about is you both have kind of mentioned how you had, single parent households growing up. And I kind of wanted to understand kind of that experience of kind of how that kind of transition period was going through that. Obviously, you mainly had to take on a lot of responsibility potentially because you only had one parent in the household. Can you just talk to, in general, what it was like going through that, and if you felt you had to take on more responsibility at an earlier age because of it?
Like I said, my parents were divorced when I was 4. So I don't think of there being any transition period. That was simply my life. And I think a lot of people, you experience your life is whatever it is. And so I think the idea of a transition period is probably just not the right concept. But, my mom did not have someone else to share responsibilities with. So she had to make a lot of choices that, I don't know how typical they were, but I know my childhood was a little bit different than most people I'd ever met because, we lived in a large apartment in Manhattan. We were lucky enough to have, a lot of rooms. There were a lot of rooms. It wasn't terribly large, but we had a lot of rooms. And so my mom was able to use our extra rooms as a way to engage people to take care of us. So, fairly early on, we pretty regularly had boarders. And I know at least probably from the time I was 5 or 6 when it started until middle school when my mom went back to law school, she would exchange a room, so instead of renting it, she would get childcare as, sort of payment. And her goal was to just sort of have an adult in the household when we would get home and someone who would, make sure we got fed and do various things. And this became more important because my mother went back to school maybe when I was about 8 or 9, I would say. She went and got an MBA in labor law at night school. And so that was very important then. And then, like I said, when I was in 6th grade, 5th, 6th grade, she went back to Pace to go to law school. St. John's, she went to law school. So I think that was a little bit unusual. And growing up in the city, we had city programs, after-school daycare centers. So I went to an after-school daycare center. I went to after-school programs at the YMHA on, 92nd, the 92nd Street Y. And, I know that I had a tremendous amount of independence and responsibility in that I would walk after school to these things. And, there were just things that I did that I don't think that I thought were very normal. And I know that when I tried to raise my kids and, here in the suburbs, I'm like, oh yeah, just walk from your friend's house, just do these things. And everyone thought I had 5 heads. Like, how dare I suggest that my children walk, on these lovely rural, village roads when I grew up at the age of 6 walking, through the streets of New York City by myself. So, I think you have things that seem completely normal in one environment don't always translate. So.
Yeah. That's a very great perspective because I will say it is a very different perspective out here in the burbs growing up compared to a city life. Monica, how about yourself? Did you feel
Well,
like there was any like a transition period in your own life having
no,
in it?
I never had a father. My father, my sister and I are 13 months apart. No, 17 months apart. And he left when she was 2 weeks old. So I never had, and my mother never remarried. So I never knew never knew about having a man in the house. I had brothers who took the place of being the man of the house. But and as far as child care goes, having a big family, babysitters were inside the house at all times. It trickled down from my older sister to my brother to my sister to my brother to my brother to me. So we never had to worry about that. My mom was very, very strict, so we weren't allowed outside until she got home from work and we ate dinner. And it was, and again, that was a normal life for us. And you're talking about going walking the streets. I was talking to my grandson yesterday, and we were talking about. He asked me what it was like in my days going to school. And I said, "You're going to laugh, but this is the truth. We really walked 5 miles to go to school, but we'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and head out, and we didn't have to worry about being uh, molested or sought after, or we didn't have to be afraid. We slept with our windows open, our doors unlocked. In today's society, it's not like that." And he was at awe. He goes, "Grandma, I just can't believe." When we went out to play during the summer, we got up, went out to play at the crack of dawn, and we didn't have to be home until it started getting dark. We didn't have cell phones to call our parents. And if one parent walked out on the porch and started hollering, we all knew it was time to go home. So that was very normal for us. We didn't see anything wrong or different because we did live in a little area in Houston. So it was very normal.
The lack of internet and 24-hour news cycles really did make people feel, I think, a lot safer. And
Yeah.
I know that, growing up, I didn't see, living in the city as something that was frightening. The most frightening thing was, don't get run over by a car. But I think that we luckily lived in a time where it's not that these things didn't happen. It just, I think it wasn't it wasn't front page news. We didn't have the same excessive news cycles. You didn't have local news fishing and
And I don't think it was as
reporting on
bad.
problems in LA,
Yeah, I wanted to press a little bit more on that. Like, obviously, this is kind of the biggest transition from generation to generation is the advent of the internet and information. And, I think maybe this might be a little bit more applicable to you, Mom, than it might be for Monica because of I being a little bit younger than Jackie. I kind of was an adolescent as kind of cell phones were moving into being smartphones. And I wanted to ask you both, even like if you were talking to parents today, what you would tell them. Like, what do you think parents should be doing in relation to smart technology and the internet with their kids and trying to do any limits of information access?
Limited completely.
Certainly.
I would honestly say that if I could go back and do anything differently, it would be to have withheld technology from my children.
Myself, I agree 100% because in our time we went outside and we played. a good thing. I was telling you about my grandson yesterday. He asked me what games we played outside, and I told him Red Rover, Hot Fuzz. He didn't know half of the games that we played as kids, and never heard of that. That's because you're not outside playing. They're just not outside enough. They need to be limited, which they are.
It is kind of
that
I mean,
and buying
adults
video
or
games.
children. Adults and children in America are like woefully deficient in vitamin D, which is just sunshine. So like, I think everybody in America is spending too much time in front of screens and not enough time outside.
Kids had to do chores. They had to earn their way to go outside to play. And if they wanted to go outside and play, they had to do their chores, which they did because they wanted to play. Today, that's not that way at all.
And I had to earn any money that I got. I did not get an allowance for doing nothing. I got an allowance, and it was definitely 100% tied to doing chores. So I doubt you know how to iron a shirt, but I knew how to iron, napkins and tablecloths. And I did a lot of ironing to make money as a kid.
I remember having to iron my brother's underwear because they were boxers. My mother, we would have to iron the sheets, and we had to iron their T-shirts, and we had to iron their underwear.
So was
I'm
it
pretty old.
like a convenience thing? That's what I have to wonder. Like, was it a convenience thing to allow the technology at that point? Because like you talk about these skills, like you're right. I probably don't know how to iron a shirt comparatively to yourself. Like, why do you think that system kind of came into place? Because I think there's been this whole kind of transitional, like a lot of people in my generation say we haven't been taught these like fundamental basic skills. Like this is a very common talking point. We're seeing a lot of articles. But why do you think that is? Is it just like?
I think expectations about, dress code expectation. I mean, when I grew up, I, as much as I hated it, I still wore a dress to school sometimes. It wasn't, there were certain just expectations as to how you dressed, that you were presentable, and that involved things like ironing, it wasn't as much of a disposable society. We used napkins regularly. We didn't use paper napkins. We used cloth napkins.
Mm-hmm.
There was a shift over many, many decades to a more disposable society.
Yes.
And, and we've all been, I think, sold on convenience. I mean, I grew up in, the age of Mad Men, literally when I watched Mad Men on TV, that was my childhood, 100%. And I had like extremely strong nostalgic connections with that show because it was just, that was what it was like to walk around the streets of New York in the 60s. People wore hats. People, wore suits. People, it was a different time period. And I think the advent of the television and advertising, which obviously went on steroids with the internet, really shifted people's expectations as to what to strive for and what was normalcy. And, it was the age of plastics. It was the age of disposability. It was the age of, convenience and, choice, like marketing to kids. I grew up in the age when people were first inventing advertising for kids. Saturday morning television was all about advertising to kids, and it was originally advertising, I think, cereal, and it advertised toys, and it started advertising clothing to kids. There have been big trends that you can tie to advertising. I think over many, many decades that really shifted expectations as to the choices people make at times. Like when I was a kid, like your parents simply decided what you were going to wear. Mm-hmm. Your parents decided what toys you were going to, what you ate for dinner. And it was just, you did things because that's what mom said.
Exactly.
And there was a definite expectation that whatever the decision was, that was the decision, and it didn't matter how much you hated it. You don't talk back. There was respect, and you spend a long time growing up, and you have the 20s, and you have the 70s, and freedom, and this, and choices, and whatever. And so when you grow up on being fed this idea of freedom and choice, and you make choices differently. So by the time I was 30 and having kids, you sort of had this sense, well, I'm going to do it very differently. And you lead from a different expectation, and you really have no understanding of how that will result in different behaviors until it happens to you. And sometimes when it's a little too late to right the boat.
It seems a little bit like almost reactionary in that because it was so authoritative and maybe restrictive, it kind of came into this opposite approach of like complete almost empowerment of kids' choice. Now, there's not everyone. We still have this kind of tiger mom phenomenon, or tiger parent is probably the better term to put.
Probably a pendulum that just swung back in the other direction. But I mean, you have to understand, I had tremendous freedom. Like Monica said, I could go out. I had a dog at the age of 9. I went to the park every single day. I was expected to take care of my dog. I had to feed my dog. I had to walk my dog. It was my responsibility. But it also meant I could go to the park and I could just be there for like an hour and a half or whatever it was. And nobody was freaking out. It's like if I was gone and the dog was in the house, I was in the park.
Exactly.
And there was no way to get a hold of me. There were no cell phones. There was nothing. And you just did things. And I could get on my bicycle, and if I was on vacation, and I had, time off, I would literally bike from 97th Street all the way to Staten Island and back, and just not even, I think we were just sort of contemplating, different types of freedoms and how things change, and the lack of choices we had. I mean, I was a latchkey kid by the time I was in middle school, and so television became very persistently on, but it was very much a background thing, and people actually would schedule their time periods around television shows because we didn't have VCRs yet, and that was the beginning, I think, of the end. Like the advent of VCRs.
Oh, but I mean, I gotta say, I think the radical shift was when we put the internet and this connectivity in our pockets, where it truly never escaped us. Like when I was talking before we got kind of interrupted, one of the things I was saying is like a real life experience is people will take out the phone as a documentarian. Like in the past, you had to be one person who really cared about photography where you would carry a camera around. Now everyone has a camera in their pocket to the point where they're not experiencing life. They're trying to document life.
Yeah.
And it's a different experience.
You're not having memories.
And it's also this kind of transfer of consciousness. Like in the past, you had to remember like phone numbers, addresses. You had to know how to actually have a sense of direction because you didn't have this piece of technology. You could simply do it for you.
You didn't offload your brain.
Yeah.
It's funny too because I still call my mom and Jeffrey. I use their phone number. I will manually dial their number because I don't ever want to forget it in case I don't have my phone on me. And as a photographer, when you said people are documenting stuff and not actually living it, like when I'm at say one of Jeffrey's metal shows, I'll be taking pictures and then I make a point to put the camera down, put my phone in my pocket and actually watch the show and appreciate what's going on. And I love the energy around me and stuff like that. So we definitely are so, I mean, even before, I think a lot of people are just on autopilot. This is what we're supposed to do. I'm supposed to get a job. I'm supposed to go to work and do this and this now. I'm supposed to wake it on social media and I'm supposed to not really think about the big what I'm actually doing with my life and if I'm happy, if I'm really doing what I feel like in my soul to be worthwhile. I think so many people are just ghosts in their own lives.
Like we're so overstimulated that we stop being conscious. We're just kind of going through the motions because,
And
if
we're
we have
being directed.
dawn to dusk of watching social media or scrolling through it, like in our downtime, we expect to be stimulated. So we don't have that kind of creative process of stillness and just, thinking to oneself and reflecting and thinking, kind of being more purposeful. We kind of get sucked into the scrolling feed instead and saying, okay, nothing's happening right now. I need a stimulus. And that's a big difference for my generation is because we have the internet and this kind of phone in our pocket at a young age, we constantly expect it to be stimulated to some degree, where now it's not even good enough to have one stimulus. We're constantly multitasking. Like, I think you can have this as a common problem when we even watch TV together. You constantly complain, like, I'll be on my phone at the same time as watching TV. And I don't think anything of it. I feel like it's very natural to me.
Yeah,
but, it's part of this kind of overstimulation, I think, that comes from my generation. And so I'd ask, how do you think new parents should approach this? There's obviously a time where technology is needed. We're not going to just completely reject the future. How do you think we bring people into that fold appropriately?
I think parents are learning that you need to be off the internet if you want your kids to be off the internet. I think people are starting to learn to use the internet as especially during COVID, like learn to bake, learn to make something, learn to do something, but use it as a way to go out and do your own thing. And I think that's important. I think that's hopefully going to be a basis for the future, is that people will use it as the excellent resource it can be, but start disconnecting, because I think, it's a pendulum. You overdo something, you learn the ramifications, and you adjust. And I think that's just something that we have to kind of go through. And I also think that that's something that gets reflected in schools, because obviously when I grew up, there was no pressure in the schools to talk about any of this stuff. When you grew up, they were already figuring out ways to teach you how to use the internet as a source. And I think that, which can make you lazy as far as doing research. I had to go to a library. I had to learn how to search for stuff. I had to actually read books, and you learned how to use like firsthand sources more. And I think that even the schools now, after they teach you how to do it, now they're teaching you how to not plagiarize, and you've got, a lot of emphasis on, how to not just copy and paste. So I think that, all of these things are explanations for behavior, but things are going to shift. And when it comes to childcare and things like that, I think we're also, due to the interconnectedness, we're starting to see other models in other countries that are effective and make sense. And I think that also feeds our expectation, about how we should be approaching our kids. Like too much homework, a lot of countries have like less homework, more outdoors, more activity. I think we had sort of rise in ADD because of a lack of activity. So I think that, things will shift.
So, Monica, I'd like to ask the same thing to you. What would you be trying to tell parents who are trying to, balance this technology for their kids when they're transitioning? There's obviously a point where they need to embrace technology. What would you tell parents who might be listening to this?
Technology is on the top of the listing. I don't know what I would actually tell them. I would tell them to limit the time, but to use it as a tool, not as a game. Most of the kids get on, they don't know what they're doing. And you think they're doing one thing and they're doing something else. They should have it where it's program where you can decide, and it is, where you can decide what they can do, what they can see, and what they can play. And exactly, the parental controls and the time limit that they have on it. I think that's real important. However, the schools now, everybody uses a computer in school. My grandson was in the 3rd grade, and he had to have a computer in order to do his schoolwork. We had a paper and pencil, and we had a book we had to read. They don't even do that anymore. So I think they've made it too important for the kids.
Yeah, you can't live without it. But
exactly,
it's ultimate knowledge at your fingertips, and that is amazing. But there is danger there are predators. Like, you really do need to monitor what your kids are doing online.
I had one final question that I wanted to ask you both, and then Jackie, if you have one more, I'd love to hear it as well. Final one I just wanted to ask you all is, when you guys were approaching like the education process, I feel like this is one of the biggest choices that a lot of parents feel like they have to make. Did you have any qualms between going the public route versus private route? Was that even a consideration for yourselves? And what would you be saying to our education system at whole? Do you think we should be having more embrace of school choice, or should more people have to go just through the public route? I'll ask Monica first on that. What do you think on that?
Public schools are great. All my kids went to public schools. It just, what bothers me is that the different types of public schools. I feel like all schools should be equal, but they're not. And when we moved to Dallas, Jackie, what she was doing in her school in Houston was so much more or less than what they were doing in Dallas.
Way farther.
So she was really far behind. And to me, all schools should be treated the same. They should all get the same amount of money. They should all have the same type of teachers. That's
the thing. When in poor neighborhoods, you get poor schools. In rich neighborhoods, you get good schools.
And that's what I'm saying. It shouldn't work that way.
Yeah, I agree.
All kids should have a great education, regardless of where you live, what your neighborhood's like, what state you live in. It's that way. And to me, that's very sad.
So how do you feel about when people make the choice to go to private schools because
if parents can afford it, they should go. Give their kids a better education. That's their prerogative. But they have to pay for it. Still pay school taxes. They still have to pay the private schools too. So they're actually paying double for their kids to get a good education.
But that does leave a lot of people, because they can afford it, that leaves a lot of people behind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Can y'all hear us?
Yeah, we can hear you. So Let me ask the same question to you. What do you think on that one?
Well, I would say that my viewpoints have really significantly changed over the years. I grew up going to public school until I was in 6th grade. In 6th grade, I went to private school. So I was in Manhattan and in East Harlem. And the truth is, I didn't know whether school was good, bad, or otherwise. I did have some uncomfortable situations, and I was a little bit overly accelerated and bored. So, public education was limited in that, and I think it's a similar problem that I continue to see, even in your school, is that, public education does a very good job for, the average student. And because mandated, it does often a good job with special needs students. But sometimes it's really not helpful for kids that are accelerated. So I ended up my mother pursued private school because she knew I was so bored. And I was luckily able to have scholarships to enable me to do that. And when I entered 6th grade, I was significantly ahead of the kids in private school. I was basically learning and taking a lot of classes with 8th graders, even though I was a 6th grader, because that's public school. As I was in East Harlem, it was not like, some super great school, but it was, the New York City school system was very, very solid. And I think it still continues to be solid. And private school was sort of very, kind of Montessori, a little more explorative, and, it was a little different. But they didn't push certain, subjects as hard. And so I was just ahead of everybody. That really evened out by the time I got to high school. I was, in still, honors classes, but there were many more kids who were learning at my pace. And I have to say, that felt really, really good. So I had a very positive viewpoint of private education because of my personal experience. And, I just sort of adopted that sort of general, idea that if you can afford it or if you can qualify for it or whatever, that was perfectly good. And I was lucky enough to get a great scholarship to go to Johns Hopkins University. So I was really blessed to have really great educational opportunities. And when I made my choice as to where to live and was making that big, where do I live? What do I do? My husband and I are both very analytical. And, we were looking at, commute times and this times and, where access to parks and all the rest. And, we just assumed that if we were going to the suburbs, my husband went to public school and I had my, public school background. So we just were like, oh, well, we're not in the middle of the city. So of course we'll send our kids to public school. We didn't even think twice about it. We just assumed that that was part of what we were buying into a nice neighborhood. And, we asked, how are the schools? And the schools in our neck of the woods were really top of the country. But my viewpoint on education has really shifted because of some of the political aspects of what's gone on in my neck of the woods. We have in our town of Ramapo, we have two school systems. One was Ramapo Central and the other was East Ramapo. And East Ramapo has made the New York Times, it's made, NPR, it's made, the news across the country due to like massive problems where East Ramapo School District went from being one of the absolute top school districts in the entire country to one of the lowest school districts in the entire country. And, the demise of the East Ramapo School District has really sort of opened my eyes up to the politics and, the disparities and how, at risk school systems can be due to, localization and, local boards who are voted in by local people with local priorities taking over. And, it's actually put me in a viewpoint to see how all of our politics in general is at risk to, certain populations that are very, very politically organized with very strong personal agendas with respect to education of their children, and how difficult it is to, how quickly something can be taken over. And I think that that's sort of informed a lot of my political views and sort of, helped me see the risk of our democracy. And, I think it's a bigger subject. But I find it now, I mean, for years, I thought like I was very, I just thought choice was something natural and that this is something that should be done. And, everybody should have the choice to send their kids to private schools and all the rest. But I have to say that this sort of awakening over the past 10 to 15 years regarding this situation has made me really, really appreciate certain, like, Scandinavian countries who mandate public education for all of their students, who sort of come up with sort of countrywide standards that are very, very high, and, that incorporate very different values than our current school systems with respect to less homework, more activity, more less structure, when the kids are very little, more focus on social interactions. I really believe that we need to learn the pluses and minuses from all of the various, examples that are out there. And I feel very badly that our country is so polarized, and that education that used to be such a driving, huge priority across the country for all elections has actually become now this incredibly polarized subject, and reflective of just sort of like the idea that you can really that it's okay to hide information from children. And I can also respect, I can respect some parents not wanting certain types of instruction. On the other hand, yeah, I mean, I can sort of see both viewpoints, but I do believe that as long as we allow and promote and have a culture where we use education as a way to honestly change and hide and control what children
does.
Yeah, and it's like people use the word cult in a very negative fashion, but there is what you grow up learning, your environment, and what you're exposed to, for better or for worse, can really change the way in which you think about everything. And I think that there are families who feel that you can never get together because there are some parents who never want their child to ever be on the internet, and there are other parents who do too much. And I think as a society, we have to be forced to actually come up with some common grounds, because that helps eliminate the extremes and force people to come up with better ways to analyze choices. And, I think that we have to strive towards that. That's my opinion. That's come out of just like a whole lot of different viewpoints on this. But I do believe that we can't continue to allow and promote segregated communities, where people have there's no requirement that people know their neighbors and other ways of thinking. And I think that that's just important. I really do. And I think that
I think you're being like incredibly tactful about saying like we're in Texas and they are like trying to erase slavery. They're trying to erase evolution. They're trying to mitigate global climate chaos. This is when we talk about education, knowledge is power. So when you're talking about not educating children, you're talking about taking away their power and taking away their power for the future as well, because then you have to, deprogram or unlearn. And there's a lot of baggage that comes with that. And, I'm personally like not a huge fan of religious private schools, because I think like education and religion should be two separate things. Like if you want to be educated in your faith, then like do that after school hours or on the weekends, like to indoctrinate children into this and children are so vulnerable and gullible, and they believe you when you tell them things like there's a man up there and he's watching every single solitary thing and every moment that you're existing. They take that to heart. I know I did, and it kind of fucked me up, excuse my language. So like I think in public school especially, there needs to be a baseline, like national level of education and standards. And this is like where John and I maybe we come together on like the testing thing, because I'm kind of like against standardized testing, but he says, it is a good way to measure where we are. And like, yes, if you're good at taking tests, there are some people who have like crippling test anxiety. And even if they're the smartest people on the planet, they'll fail that test. But, we really should have. And that was one of the things we definitely agreed on in the education episode was we need a national standardized, because it is still very much separate and very much unequal. I came from a predominantly poor minority neighborhood that I was in accelerated classes. And then when we moved to a wealthier, predominantly white neighborhood, I was put in remedial classes. That's how big of a difference those two school districts were. And that's why we moved to that nice neighborhood, was to get into good schools, because my mom felt that was very important. Not everybody has the opportunity to change. And so I think it's one of the greatest disservices that we can do generation after generation, is to essentially condemn children to lesser education, which is in turn going to give them less opportunities, less money, less upward mobility. Like, we are literally condemning entire generations of people to poverty year after year after year. And it doesn't have to be this way. It's such a stupid way to fund schooling and that have different school boards dictate what is and isn't important. Like, again, in Texas, they are really big about abstinence only and not talking about sex education. And we have some of the highest repeat teen pregnancy. Repeat. So, like, not only do they don't talk about, sex but like you don't have, and now they're trying to make, abortion legal and stuff. So they're giving people less and less and less opportunities to make decisions, for good, informed decisions for themselves and their future. And that's something that's infuriating, that I've witnessed literally my entire life.
Yeah. Well, all of that is actually valid. And if you are not familiar with YAFFED, certainly that is something that you should look into. YAFFED. That is a local organization that has come out of the religious community here in Rockland County, and represents also, students and adults who grew up in similar communities in Brooklyn, who are fighting for, a good solid basis of secular education for their community. But part of being able to do some kind of standardized, broader, more inclusive education, it's got to start with respect. And for those who are non-religious, it has to also start with respect for people who are coming at it with, with all of their agenda items and all the rest, because and the question is, how do you thread through and deal with just facts and learn to teach sort of, how teach the thought process that allows people to sort of say, there's history and then there's opinions that come out of history. And it's like we will never all come together until everyone can, come up with some kind of a respect for other people's opinions and an interest and willingness to sit down and talk about concerns. And it's a really big, it's a big problem, and that this can't happen. And I know, the only way to get past the polarization that everyone's experiencing, whether it's religious, whether it's political, whether it's anything, is to start with an attitude of respectfulness. And so that's the most important thing that I think we all need to teach our children, is just, however we do it, whatever platforms we do it on, is we have to talk by teaching people to listen, and to respect. And if you don't agree, you need to learn how to respectfully disagree, and focus on things that you can agree on. And, that's where we have to start for the future. And that's all I have to say on the subject of education. Yeah.
So, Jackie, do you have any final questions you wanted to ask? My final one was on school choice. We've gotten to talk about a lot today. Is there any other ones on childcare you want to touch on? I know we haven't done like the child tax credit. Is there any other things that we could talk about?
What would a child tax credit, a monthly stipend? What's the max, like $200 a month doing? Is that what it is?
I think it's 300.
Okay, what would $300 have done raising us?
A month?
A month.
Nothing.
helped out a whole lot.
No, it would have been huge.
Yeah.
That goes what
Raising
Marianne
6
Williamson
kids
said.
is not cheap. I worked full-time jobs. I worked 2 jobs at one time. I worked a job and a half another time. Yeah, that extra money would have helped.
And I remember missing my mom because she worked so much. I think a lot of kids are missing their parents because they have to work 2 jobs.
And I remember missing my mother because my mother had to work.
Yeah.
I mean, I can remember waking up in the morning and she's already gone and going to school, coming home. We had the kids had to, we had to keep the house clean. We had to cook the meals. We had to do the laundry because she didn't have time. She came home, she ate, she talked with us for a little while, and she'd go to bed. So the majority of my life, my time with my mother was she wasn't there very much. When she was, it wasn't always nice. So because she was tired and life was hard.
So $300 a month would help.
Oh yeah, $300 now would help though. I'm only kidding. But you know, as a parent, you do what you have to do. My kids used to get mad because they would come up to me and they say, "Mom, can we do this?" And I'd say no, because I didn't think it was something they should do. They'd go, "Well, my friend's mom." I said, "You know what? I'm not your friend's mom, and I'm not even your friend. It's not my job to be your friend. It's my job to be your parent, to teach you." And I think that's what's missing in a lot of today's society. Parents want to be their kid's friend. They don't want to be a parent.
A good lesson. So, I want to just ask, Mom, do you have any final thoughts that you wanted to share with our audience? We've obviously talked a lot of different subjects today. Any final thoughts you want to give people on the subject of childcare?
Well, I'll share one thought. Hopefully I won't take too long, but I'm going to make one comment for kids your age. That was my wake up call. Growing up, I grew up and had no money. My mom was always working, single mom, and it was hard. Like I completely, just want to comment that my mom was tired and it was sometimes really difficult. And we had difficult relationships. It took me a long time to come up and really respect what she had gone through and recognize that she had done it for us. So, but like coming out of high school, I had this profound decision thought process in my mind that I was only ever going to have one child. And that was very important to me. And I felt that like abortion was like, I could go in I could make that choice in my life. And that was something that was appropriate and good for society to have just one child. And I had a big wake up call in college when I met, my boyfriend's parents, and his household had 6 children. And I just couldn't even imagine, educated people wanting to have 6 children. Like, why would they impoverish themselves and make choices in their lives when they were obviously so smart, that they should go and do this and make the choice to have so many children and not have the wherewithal to go on vacations and do various things. And what they said to me was so profound that it really changed my life decisions. And that was that because they were smart, because they, cared and cared about society at large, they felt it was their moral obligation to have children, to replace themselves, and to basically pass on their good values. And this is a thought process that we usually attribute to like religious groups, like you were saying, and things of like that, or very poor people who just just have children, or welfare moms, or whatever it is. The idea is that I had a definite disrespect for people who had large families, and I saw it in a very different lens. And the idea that what they explained, they said, society is becoming polarized. People with wealth focus on doing things and spending their money and having freedom and having this, and they tend to have very small families, and they concentrate their wealth in their two children or their three, whatever. And so that increasingly over time, the people who were having a lot of children were people who were having a lot of children for very different reasons. And that, society was becoming very polarized with a lot of money concentrated at the top. And this was back in like early 80s. So this was like Reagan years that this comment was being made to me. And that, that if you truly believed in a thoughtful society, a respectful society, bringing up intelligent, caring human beings who are capable, that, if you have the ability and the wherewithal and the patience to raise children, that you have almost an obligation to, the long-term health of the world and society at large, to have children, to not be afraid of having more children, to learn how to, put value in raising good people in this world, and that it's more important to raise another caring, respectful human being who's going to be, like ecologically minded or whatever that is, to balance out the future, because, we'll all get old and society changes over time based upon the people who are there to populate it and be leaders. And so I made a commitment at that point, after swearing I would never have more than one child. I was like, I'm going to have at least 3 children. I'm going to do at least better than average, which at the time was 2.3 kids. So I said, I'm going to have at least 3 children because I owe that. I was blessed. I was healthy. I had the wherewithal to make money, and I knew that I could do it. And that was something that after I had a couple kids, I didn't know if I could do it because I didn't like being pregnant. But I did. I had 4 pregnancies. I have 3 children now, and and maybe I should have done more. I don't know, but I do believe that it's something that I really grew up not thinking that way, and I really do see the need to change, because I can see that people where the population grows will have political clout, and political clout will change our future for everyone. And I think that we need to have more people who are really dedicated to education, democracy, and respect. And that's what we have to do in this world.
Thank you for that. Monica, I wanted to ask the same for you. Did you have any final thoughts that you wanted to share on the subject of childcare and child development?
I think that as far as having kids, I'm like your mother. I had 4, ended up with 3. They had a tough life. They had a hard life. But we were together. And parents have to make the right choices. And unfortunately, sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. But you see the results of your efforts and all this stuff when you see your children as adults. I had one of my daughters tell me, said, Mom, I did not like you as a parent, did not like you, but I love you as my mother today. And it's like, yeah, well, that's because I didn't let you get away with murder. So I think parents need to be real aware and involved, involved in the kids' lives. My girls were in softball, they were in Girl Scouts, they were in musicals, they were
in PTA.
I mean, out
She was
everything.
a softball coach.
Parents have to be very connected to their children in order for their children to understand some of the things that parents go through. And then they look back and they say, dang, Mom, I can't believe you did all that. Well, you got to do what you got to do with what you got. And it was important to me that my girls, and I told my girls every single day, you're beautiful. I do believe that children believe what they're told. especially when they're young. So I kind of drove it into their heads that you're smart, you're beautiful, there's nothing you can't do. And all my children are very successful. So we did something.
Yeah. High five to that.
Yes, I think that's a great note to end on. I just want to say thank you so much, my mom, for
Thank
coming
you,
on, as
Mom.
well as to Monica. It was a pleasure to be able to meet you on
Well,
today's
it's not,
episode.
Jackie talks about you all the time, John.
Always,
Oh, wow, likewise.
I'm thinking,
always good.
yeah, it's always good. But we're ADD.
Feel free to edit as you
I don't know how you work with her sometimes.
Yes, there will definitely be some editing along the way. But for everyone who tuned in, I hope you all enjoyed this. I very much did myself. I want to really thank you both for sharing your perspective. I learned a lot too that I didn't even know about my own mom's perspective here today. So this was a great time for me. I hope you all enjoyed. Please make
Thank
sure
you.
if you are listening to this, please hit that subscribe button so that you're notified whenever our future podcasts come out, as well as please leave a rating or a like. It really helps us boost ourselves with the algorithm. So that being said, our universal basic people, we really want to thank you for coming today's episode. And as always, we hope you stay classy out there.